This is Mile High.
Do I want to tell the story or do I want to show the message?
You've got a lot of work to do between Mile High.
The time has come where we can know
we have a responsibility, an ethical and moral responsibility.
We have to do it better in order to move people along.
Up, down, inside out.
If you get your mind right, it is not. It is a receiver of thought. Because love is my first technique.
it's now time for the show.
Welcome to the Mile High Podcast. Wherever you are listening, watching, whether it be iTunes or Spotify, most certainly hit subscribe so you never miss any Mile High tick. And also make sure you dial in to be on higher ground like I am right now. I'm sharing with you from 5,280 feet where you want to be in September for Mile High 13. Don't let the 13 scare you, okay? We'll see you on higher ground then. Rise up to milehigh.com. And right now, I'm so thrilled to have on this podcast a featured favorite Mile High presenter, Dr. David Fletcher, one of my favorite people in chiropractic, and most likely one of yours too. If not, after this podcast, he will be. He's the CEO of CLA. He's recognized one of the leading authorities in the transitional shift towards neurologically centered chiropractic. I am such a proud owner and user of CLA equipment and a big proponent. In fact, just did a presentation on it at Sherman College Lyceum. He's an innovator with the Insight scanning technologies. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Dr. David Fletcher.
Oh, Danny, come on. Don't you just wish that everybody could have just listened in on what we were talking about before we get the record switch? It's my joyful pleasure to spend some time with you and to talk chiropractic, and most importantly, support the people that are listening to us so that they can, have an experience like you and I have had throughout our careers.
Yes, and I'm such a big proponent of scanning the nerve system, and learning, really seeing what's going on in that neurological core of the person's body. And I'm so glad that you help people find that as a direction in chiropractic. So let's dive into some novel areas of this. And we kept talking for 15 minutes before we started hitting record because we could keep talking forever. So it was also great to see the Berkshire's experience. So let's get right into nitty gritty. What's new and exciting going on in the world of CLA?
Well, the world of CLA represents chiropractic. And so when I talk about what's new in the world for us, it really is representative of what we're feeling and seeing. We, as part of our conversation, we engage chiropractors in something like 23 or 26 different countries. So we got a really nice, idea as to what is emanating out of these different jurisdictions. I can tell you right now, this is, and no one really wants to hear this, but you should hear this, is that the story that we've been presenting for 130 years is actually the story of the day in healthcare, but also on people's minds. They don't know it as they should yet, and that's our role. In other words, our role is to be the innovator of the communication so that people are engaged in it. But as much as chiropractic has always been engaged in the neuro age, as I coined the term, the neuro age of chiropractic is associated, we've always been in the nervous system, but the public is now hyper aware of what's going on in the nervous system. And there's a newfound understanding, joyfulness. And it really started, interestingly, with technology, which is being sort of on the forefront of it. There's hardly a person in the Western world on the planet that isn't using an HRV app to check their sleep, to understand what their fitness recoveries are and everything else. They're completely misguided in what they're doing with the results of it. But at the same time, there's a hyper awareness that it's worth it to have a biomarker of how your body is compensating or at least adapting or maladapting to stress. Pretty cool stuff that's happening.
It's really exciting, because it's like the public is being primed to put attention to what we do in a way they haven't done before.
Well, and on top of that, they need somebody to interpret what it really means in terms of the big story. What is happening, as is always the case, is that biometrics conversations, they get distorted and get led down the pathogenic conversation. There's a sickness associated with a metric that's over here, and that's not where we are. We're exactly the opposite. We're under the idea that there is this intelligence that's constantly reorganizing. So let's wake it up. Let's understand how to give a greater perceptual impact to our daily activities. And when we start to think like the pathology-based model, we're nothing. We turn into nothingness in the world. In fact, I am so sad for so many of the young doctors who are graduating out through the schools that have this idea that we're therapy based and that we're structure based, and it impacts the nervous system through trauma or through something of that nature. What we need to help those young doctors especially do is understand that they may not know right now, but they got the gift of life, meaning it's so easy to, Dan, is it easy to be a chiropractor with conscience? It's like there's nothing easier on the planet. You can make a fortune if that's where your metrics are, but you can change the lives of so many people if you just drink the Kool-Aid.
Right. And also, you have such tools that will help you distinguish what you do from the public perception of what chiropractic is. Because as you know, and I know, the public perception is different, like you just alluded to, than what it actually is. I had someone who I came across, spoke to in our office, and they said, I was talking about care, and they said, well, physical therapists are neurologically based and chiropractors are about the bones. And I was like, oh my God.
Okay. Let's go. But you know what? I mean, it's really simple to help people understand the distinction between therapy and, whether it's to the spine or to the nervous system. But let's just say that the eminence of our story is from above down, inside and out. And the out is what I really want them to hear, is that that's the last of the four letters that exist. Because when people, and this goes right back to our young graduates, if you want to say that, is that they're taught that the nervous system that they interact with is primarily from the IVF outward. And they're not, and even if you tend to pathologize with the symptoms of what that looks like, you're on point with it, but that's not what we do. What we do is we organize, or we allow Innate to organize in the central core. And you were teaching this past weekend at IRAPS associated with that core cord tension. And it's the principle of tone, it's the principle of centralization, it's the principle of impacting the global person, not their local symptoms. And that's what people have to understand.
Right, exactly. Since you mentioned about people, connected to HRV and not necessarily interpreting right, let's help chiropractors interpret it stronger. What's something that you can help them know?
Baby, let's get into it.
Yeah.
Well, listen, why don't I take us on an interesting journey, which is sort of in the big picture, and then we'll boil it down to the HRV communication. And this will be quick. But I was having one of those moments, where you try and take what you've learned and try and put it into the present, and also the models of the principles. And we talk about the three intelligences that are in conversation, right? We talk about universal, innate, and educated. Those are conversations in the green books that are very much integrated into our lexicon and into chiropractic. But there's a new intelligence that is being discussed these days, and it's artificial intelligence, or AI. And AI is not to be confused, all right, with the first two natural intelligences, which are universal and innate. Educated and artificial are in a separate group. They're distinctively human, but they're not of nature, meaning that they're a learned experience that has to be developed. And so as a consequence of that, we are smarter or have access to information than ever before. And we've talked a bit about that. But the principles of universal and innate are very simplistic, okay? Is that, and when I mean simplistic, it's on the complexity on the far side of simplicity, but the realities is that the intent of intelligence at those two primal levels is to organize. In other words, to organize to a highest degree of efficiency, but get this, is to cause a survival instinct. But what most people don't realize is that the survival instinct isn't about the organization. That comes as a secondary, if you will. It's to allow neurons to survive. Okay. And that's really important that you understand that, because it again speaks to the primacy, is that without the nervous system being able to regenerate and reorganize itself, the humanness and the other intelligences don't get a chance to perform. Okay. So what we need to understand is that we are wired through our genomic expressions, through innate, if you will, to tap into universal with the prime feature of reorganizing the neurology. And as a consequence of that, if we reorganize the neurology, two things happen, is that we allow ourselves to perceive appropriately in our environment. Fred Barge, smartest guy on the planet. One cause, one cure, one correction, right? BJ Redux, speaking through Fred. The one cause is the inability to perceive ourselves in our environment. Before we can perceive ourselves in our environment, Danny, we have to receive information. You have to receive to perceive. If you've got cluttered closets in the in the receptive model, and we're a sensory and receptive nervous system, you have to receive to react.
Right.
We have to realize that the noise that's in a compensated and subluxated system does two things, is that we can't perceive ourselves in our environment. We compensate. It distorts the ability of that efficient reorganization, and neural cells wither. They don't just stop communicating, they die. And these pathways become convoluted and become distorted permanently, except we were given the second gift, which is called neuroplasticity, which means that we get a chance to re-engage the minute that we get perception and reception reorganizing. Okay? It's taken care of. That's the intelligent design of our system. What we have to do is remove interference to the neural dural core so that it can get on with doing everything I just talked about.
Right. Right. And then have coherence.
And so chiropractors recognized that this was a measurable or observable trait when you were out of sync, if you will. And we refer to it in very simple terms called ease and dishyphenated ease, which, if we move forward and use the physics term of when you look at complex systems reorganizing, that's known as coherence. And to do that in complex systems reorganizing, you get to entrain the system to allow it to perform at that high reorganizational efficient model. But it's the model of coherence, which means that we now are in harmonic capacities with our environment, and that is called coherence. And Danny, what is the opposite of coherence?
Interference.
Well, incoherence.
Right.
Noise. In other words, we have disharmony that goes on, or we call it dishyphenated ease. Well, when we take a look at the primal models of this listening, receiving, perceiving, and reacting, we have been gifted that's the sensory nervous system that's over here. We have been given two primal other divisions of the nervous system. One is motor, which means that we get a chance to navigate through gravity. And the second is regulatory, which is autonomic. And the reason I'm going down the obvious here is we've got a reception model, which is talking, and we allow that to let itself organize. And there's certain sequences that go along with that. But we now have a motor system, which chiropractic was smart enough to say, there is structure in this whole concept. We need to look at how the body has warped or adapted or communicated through the nervous system of motoricity. But the real game is when we start to look at autonomicity, which is associated with, as we know, the sympathetic and parasympathetic models. I told you it was going to take a long time to get to HRV. So HRV is very simply listening to the rhythms of the heart. And we certainly know that the prime oscillator, which you and I talk a lot about, because you have to have a prime oscillator to entrain complex systems. Mm-hmm. The prime oscillator of the heart is set to have a rhythmic beat pattern. Mm-hmm. And as a consequence of a rhythmic beat pattern, it has to be regulated by that speeds it up and that reorganizes to slow it down. Sympathetic, parasympathetic. And so we can use the heart to understand the balance and the degree of coherence in the autonomic nervous system. And that can then be projected to how well the entire multi-system, multi-organ system of the body is set in entrainment to be in a rhythm of ease versus dishyphenated ease.
Yes. Now, with that and interpreting that, and chiropractors interpreting things, chiropractors tend to, I'm making a generality, okay? They tend to give things in a way of just good and bad.
Yes.
And not necessarily the depth that is really in the information that's being provided about the nervous system, all right? And I'd like to have a little bit more depth, which you just provided. There was a chart that I saw from, I think it was from CLA, maybe it was from someone else, but it was about, I'm pretty sure it's from CLA, about this process that happens. It was like most the readings will shift towards sympathetic and then drop down and then go towards parasympathetic and then drop down again. Am I ever
Absolutely. That's referred to as our rainbow graph.
Right, and there was this chart of this is the more typical as a person gets more ill. Can you help people understand that?
Absolutely. So one of the great joys is that we started scanning to the nervous system through HRV analysis long before the world caught up. In fact, it was 2003. We were well ahead of the curve. And as a consequence of that, we were able to do what everybody understands, which is to look at the relationship of sympathetic tone to parasympathetic tone. Mm-hmm. These are algorithmic, calculable data set points that are in here. But what happens, Danny, is that when people, and they're very simple analogies to understand. Let's just assume the sympathetic is gas pedal on and parasympathetic brake coming on. All right. What happens is that in the understanding of being sympathetic dominant, which means that you tend to stress out, you have to be able to hit the brake. And the brake has to be able to erase, if you will, that model. Well, we in 2003 and 2004 decided, well, why don't we find out how calm the person can be, and let's see what their at-rest set points are. Okay, so we went to that and we said, let's put in a GSR and a temperature assessment at the same time as we're looking at a heart rate assessment. Right. So now we could quantify whether the person who was there was sitting in their calm state. Okay, there's 100 different ways in which we also control the signals being managed and everything else that's going on. But when we read the data, we go, oh my goodness, you're living as if your foot is on the gas pedal, even though you're at extreme rest. That's in
right.
All right. So that tells us two things, is that you have compensated your nervous system. And more importantly, you are living with a blunted vagal tone, meaning that your parasympathetics aren't matching the need for this. Now, you can't get anything more chiropractic than discussing vagal tone, to put it simply. So what you were final comment before I go into the dropping lower left, et cetera, right, is that at the same time as we were understanding how to collect data in this quiet state, we were able to understand the possibility of plots that a chiropractic outcome should reach. And that's what we figured when we did scatter plots with 2,468 well-adjusted scans on people. We went, oh my goodness, when we compare with the data that's affiliated with the normal person in public, unadjusted, and we see where a chiropractic outcome is going to be, it's a world of difference. And we plot that on the green zone on this rainbow graph. We know those are attainable outcomes, okay, when under it. So just imagine that you have a center line. On the left is the relationship to sympathetic dominance or parasympathetic insufficiency. And on the right is actually worse than what you would imagine. It means that you can't interpret this stress to react. So it looks like it's parasympathetic dominant, but it's actually sympathetic insufficient, meaning that they become hypoadrenic, if you will. All right. So we meet people, sadly, at conferences and in our offices. And the normal set point is to have low activity within their autonomic nervous system. So they're kind of like low horsepower, and that they're sympathetic dominant, which means that they're kind of living a distressful life. You know, stress has caught up with them and they're locked in that pattern. When we begin to adjust them, Danny, it starts to wake it up, arouse innate. And as a consequence of that, we start to see this dot, if you will, start to want to balance itself out or move more towards the midline. But it's still very low. And as we then challenge them, don't forget, adjustments are stressful. Adjustments are stressful to the existing status quo. Right. So now and that's why we don't do it every day or like wearables are. That's why we do it over a time period of, say, 12 visits or a month or 3 weeks or 2 weeks, whatever you want. Mm-hmm. We start to build trends into this relationship. And now we can watch it go from being low left to where it comes midline, but then it's a stress, and then it gets exhausted, and then it gets up and it gets up. And eventually they track towards that green box, which is higher. Right. The opposite occurs when they get unwell. They become subluxated and they start to become more sympathetic dominant. And the innate tries to correct it and pulls it to where now it's exhausting itself to try and fix the issue. And that becomes a stress that then slides it back the other way to sympathetic dominant. And so it's like we refer to that as the falling leaf syndrome, is that you can track this falling leaf. Unfortunately, the end point is in what we call quadrant 4. And quadrant 4 is what is sympathetic insufficient, low activity levels, and they become so vulnerable that they can't react even through their sympathetic system to react to the stress. They're exceedingly vulnerable. And it's tragic.
Right.
Because chiropractors can avert that with them.
And then that fourth quadrant is the
bottom right.
Sympathetic decreased.
Yeah. So sympathetic is not even responsive to the stressors that come at them.
Right. And then that's the most weakened?
Yes, weakened is the clinical, observation that we see. Vulnerability is the outcome, but they are just depressed in their physiology and they're depressed in their emotions.
Right. And their ability to make change.
Oh, yeah.
Their bandwidth is
guide
decreased.
Those people. Like the tragic thing is that most of those people end up in medicine because they're having a distressful pathogenic response to any stresses that come along. But if we meet them and they're in that fourth quadrant, you got to love them. You got to love those people and give them the care that's personalized, that's very, very much in their best, because if they don't get what you can give them, there's only one path they're going to take. Like, that's not self-correcting when they're down in that bottom right, I should say. That's not self-correcting. They are going to end up on medications to try and alter their physiology to stable their insufficiencies. They're going to end up in a decline that we can't always turn around.
Right. And again, it's some of the most compromised that people come in, and people don't necessarily know that when they're taking care of it. They tend to say, oh, this is good or bad, instead of having the full clinical picture of what it is that the person's taking care of. Chiropractors tend to do that. And again, I hope they listen to this and take that in and then study the resources that you provide more. And by the way, if someone who's listening to this, and this is completely new, they've never heard of Insight, thermography, electromyography, what would be their first step to learn more, connect more with CLA?
We put a tremendous amount of energy into just the person that you're talking about. There is, first and foremost, we're there to inspire and inform chiropractors. And if they like what we have, they can get involved in getting the tech like you did. But we built our website so there is a very robust resource section that's open to anybody. Anybody can go on there. So it's Insight CLA, INSIGHTCLA.com, insightcla.com. And you just go on the top bar and there's a resource section, drop it down. And there are blogs, there are ebooks. There's an ebook that you're talking about, which is the clinical application of HRV,
Right.
in a chiropractic practice. There's an ebook that's called RED, which is how we train our clients to think logically when it comes to looking at the nervous system. So RED stands for the amount of reserve that they have within their nervous system, the amount of exhaustion that they are involved with, and the depth under which their physiology is being distorted. And that actually matches HRV, EMG, and thermography being used in sequence. So there's tons and tons of that. And I'll just mention that we have a lot of, published video on Kairos of CLA when it comes down to our YouTube channel, as well as always, check out Doc Fletch on Instagram. So there's reels that we put together all the time. So lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of touch points.
Right. So now if someone if someone wants to dive into this and they need to learn more because maybe they've been focused, and not that it's bad, but focused on structure, and they're then bringing in these technologies. They're looking at neurothermal, neural behavior, and the neural pulse. What is a good thing, and how they communicate that to a person that's coming in and they're thinking chiropractors focus on bones?
Well, I think that's a beautiful, we refer to that as a critical shift. And remembering that the shift has to happen in the chiropractor, it's not going to happen spontaneously because you put a wall chart up with a nerve on it. It's got to be that it's in your soul when you go and have this conversation. But I think that one of the things we have come to agreement with is that the nervous system can get very congested, become incoherent if it's overwhelmed with stress. So use that to your advantage. Is that, and although we ask a lot more, I love to listen to my new patients. Like, I just love to listen to where they can define their life and their health. And so, what brings you in here? Why don't you tell me your story? It's as simple as that. You don't have to go into the barrage of, does it bother you when you're in sleep or bending left or bending right? Because that's pathology. And I just listen. And, when we're talking about it, they come in with, make the assumption that they come in knowing nothing about chiropractic and they think it's of the spine. That's what you should do when a patient comes in front of you, even though the joy of it is that it's changing. And I'll let them have their story. And before I go into any of the clinical questions that I know I want to ask, I'll just say, what surprises me is that your body, which was designed to take care of you without you thinking about it, has reached this state. And what I've learned over my years in practice is the best starting point is to look at how the stresses that you've lived under have actually stained or impacted the way the nervous system performs. Because the nervous system controls everything from the spinal pain you're talking about, to the way you think, to the way you breathe, to the way you dream. So we have a technology that allows us to look deeper than your symptoms and gives us a window into how we can see how it is performing. That, to me, makes most sense as the best starting point. Now, let me ask you a few more questions, and then I take it from there. And that gives me the latitude to say, I'm a nerve-first approach. And once I go through my evaluation of a nerve-first approach, if I personally feel that their structure is so impacted that I want to get an x-ray, goodness gracious, I'll order an x-ray. I'm never, ever, ever out of sync with learning more from the person in front of me, because my intention is to be their primary care provider and inspire for the rest of their lives. So why wouldn't I want to know more about them instead of just their symptoms?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Now, you and I crossed paths at many a thing, and we saw each other at Berkshire's and got to spend a little time together. We saw each other at, we didn't see each other at Sherman College.
We were very close.
We were close, but we weren't. Can you share anything about your experiences at the Berkshire's chiropractic experience at Sherman Lyceum?
Well, the Berkshires is not in the Berkshires. It's everywhere, but it's in Puerto Rico. But it's a gathering of incredibly principled learners because it attracts many of the students. In this case, Berkshires in Mexico really supports the emerging community of chiropractic students, chiropractors in the Latin American world. And I met some incredible doctors from Chile, from Brazil that had come up into the Mexican area. By the way, Mexico City it blows your mind. It's such a cosmopolitan city, and the food in there is amazing. But at the conference, there was no doubt that everyone was engaged in just what we were talking about. Maybe not the same language I'm using, but engaged in the same principles that were to say, we have to take control of this conversation that is locked into pathology, but is needing to be over in salutogenesis. That's what we have to do. And here's the biggest point, Danny, is that we have all the tools. We have learned through 130 years of application that we can match the science, which is emerging now through neuroplasticity and neurofunctionality, to match the art that we have, and to obviously be embracing the principles that give us all the latitude to have conversations about hope to people. But can I just add this one thing? Is that in those conversations, and this was at the Berkshires and in Lyceum and otherwise, there's an honesty and there is a reality that by the time we meet people and by the time their subluxations and their nervous system are so distorted, it takes time. Right. Sixth principle, it takes time. And so just because somebody walks over the threshold and says, I'm going to have my first adjustment or I'm going to get into a chiropractic care plan, doesn't mean that it's all unicorns and roses. You got to be on the ball. And that's what these conferences were all about, was being honest and being receptive, never losing hope, but being realistic with your care.
It was also very exciting at the Berkshires to see the energy of chiropractors and new chiropractors and chiropractic students that really wanted to, new chiropractic was more, and that it was about the nerve system, and that, really wanted to dive into what our principles and foundations are about compared to maybe what, was being, what the public thought or what's been emanated. And it was really inspiring and a new hope to see that.
It was. And there were a tremendous number of doctors at both events that were from Europe as well, had traveled a long way. And as a result of that, you got this community of togetherness, and you could speak to the Europeans and they have taken a really distinctive role, the group we were talking with especially, to not get caught up in being a subspecialty of medicine. Meaning that they clearly go out. One of the fastest growing hubs that we have from a CLA perspective, because we talk to the nervous system, we talk through the principles. So we've got this incredible community of doctors that are just like you and I talking here. And the Netherlands, Travis Corcoran, obviously, he's created a movement within the Netherlands that's affiliated with opening offices down in the Latin American. There's David Serio, whose group Viva is associated with all throughout teaching the principles. There's Liam Schabel, who's out there. There's these natural groupings of people, and of course, as more and more, and they're very successful. Let's be clear with it. It's hard not to be successful when you embrace this level of enthusiasm and certainty. Right. And so it's not surprising that these are leaders of a movement in these different jurisdictions that are attracting young doctors, that are attracting young students to come in. It's fantastic.
And having the energy that goes up as towards more energy richness, and they're focusing on the true foundations of the principle. And what about your experience at Sherman?
I love Sherman. Listen, there's a couple of things.
And thank you for donating instrumentation. Thank you for doing that to support the students there.
Well, absolutely. And, we do that selectively. We don't go to schools that don't talk the subluxation, but we're now in 6 schools. And just along that, as I get to Sherman, I spent a lot of my time at the New Zealand school with the principals there, but also just because I love going to New Zealand. But on top of that, I teach there. And now you actually have to show proficiency in being able to interpret and do scanning in the same way you have to have that in X-ray to graduate out of New Zealand. It's so embedded in the core curriculum. So Sherman has such a history of listen, I went from Sherman, this is part of the story, to speak at the Pennsylvania conference outside of Pittsburgh. Now you remember, like, Sherman was birthed out of Penn State, right? Basically, from the earliest of days, and then when Tom Gilardi set it up under the Lal Sherman, auspices of how chiropractic looked. They had a great idea that was very narrow, very principled, and otherwise. When you go on Sherman campus now, the Gilardi building is gorgeous. I mean, it's beautiful, which means it's synonymous with growth. Mm-hmm. The Spartanburg community, which you used to practice in, has emerged from being a rundown, second-rate town, if you would, to being where in Greenville and Spartanburg, it's one of the fastest growing communities in America, and it is rich with talent that's around there. So I think it matches what Sherman talks about, which is the emergence of greatness. Sherman's a beautiful school. You know what? And I don't mean just physically. It's never lost its way. It's never lost its way. Like all institutions, there's always the opportunity to be a little bigger, better, and you're always striving to make better research, to have better, facilities and everything else. Sherman has reached a new level since I've been involved, not because of me, but since I've been watching it. It's wonderful.
Yeah, it's very exciting to see the energy up level, and the campus, the buildings, it's the energy around it is very very inspiring and very contagious. Okay, contagious in a good way.
Well, but listen, don't miss what drives that, and that's the board of trustees, the board of directors. They have a vision that they need to do, and you and Rochelle and your family are so invested in this growth of a principled school. You graduated from it, and I get all that, but that's not just because it's your alma mater. It's because it's your landing point. And I want to acknowledge that right now, that it takes a tremendous amount of life energy to put that energy into the growth and development of an institution.
Well, thank you for saying that. And, Rochelle and I, we feel, there's a biblical quote about giving back to what has given you so much. I'm paraphrasing, it's a biblical principle. And, when I think about Sherman and how much it has given myself and Rochelle, you have to give back to that, in chiropractic overall. So, and I know you feel the same way. Overall with chiropractic and how much it's given you, and that's you put your energy into CLA not just because of CLA and being CEO and such but really the impact it's impacted your health and well-being and so on.
It's our family, and I had to get over this. I'm a CMCC grad, and Canadian Memorial is not principled. Okay, it was a lot better when I was there, but it's lost its way. And there was a lot of regret and a lot of anger and a lot of those things that go along, really negative emotions. And I came to realize that was one of the greatest gifts I had, was the void that was created there, was the value that I needed to fill it up with. And it put me on a journey. And I was giving an assembly at Life West. And you get those sort of sparks where you kind of go, oh yeah, that's a good idea, and it's not on the teleprompter, and it was, and I said to them, I said, you're sitting here not of a product alone of what it is that you chose to be, but you're sitting here as a product of what you chose not to be.
Yes.
I said, and I said, it's critically important you realize that it was your free will, that you had an opportunity to be anything you wanted to be. Each of us has our own free will path that goes along with it, but you chose not to be something to allow you to be a chiropractor. Now you need to honor that. You're not going to you need to sit in these chairs and realize that no one has the right to push you off what you chose to be.
Right.
You need to get angry with institutions that don't teach you what a chiropractor is. You need to get committed to standing behind institutions that are focused on chiropractic. And that's what you and I have done.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And I'm, glad to also both of us inspire more people to do that as well.
I hope so.
So again, I'm so super grateful to the whole CLA team and the mission. And, I've been a long-term fan since, I don't know, it was my first few months out of chiropractic school when I had my first substation at that point. And so, we're just getting another unit for our office because
So
of
exciting.
expansion and needing more to be able to give people the best care. So if people are like, I've never used this technology, and I really encourage people to, the more objective indicators that you can utilize, the better care you're going to give. I always tell people to have a wide range of objective indicators because it will help you give better care, but it's also going to help these get better because you'll start to, one of the values of instrumentation is when they don't change. When they don't change is when you'll be able to grow and see, well, what am I missing? What can I do better? How can I address this person but differently?
Well, that absolutely. And I think I really want to highlight, I live in the sensing functionality world in CLA. These are incredible sensors. This is reality, right? And but these don't measure down to the third decimal point when it comes to firing of the nervous system. So we need instrumentation. The world doesn't limit itself. That intellectualism builds bigger models so that we can have bigger outcomes. Yes. And so when you have, and I want people to realize that these can take you so far, but when you add even deeper looks through instrumentation, it has greater ability to give confidence to what we know are the outcomes that chiropractic can have, but it multiplies that. And yes, you can talk about practice building and retention and attraction and everything else. It's spontaneous. When you are doing things at the appropriate level with the integrity of a chiropractor, with the honesty that's associated with understanding functionality of the doctor in you, it's the easiest job in the world.
Right.
I mean, you can't keep them away. The biggest problem you and I are having in our worlds is attracting better doctors to work with.
Yes,
it's just we're so darn busy.
Yes,
we can't keep up with the necessity to grow young doctors to grow into our world.
While there's no shortage of spines distorted.
Oh, and I can promise you that there is not one human on this 8 billion person planet that doesn't have the need for higher performance in their nervous system.
Right, without a doubt. So
no question.
Again, I am so grateful for the energy of the whole of yourself and the whole CLA team. And I have to say, if you're at any event, of course, Mile High, and there is a CLA team member there, chat with them. Just walk over and get to know what they're doing more, even if you have the tools, because you'll learn more, I'm sure, in that interaction. You'll be able to ask a question or two, and most certainly if you don't, because it'll help you give more clinically excellent care.
It's one of the big reasons we attend so many functions in our group in chiropractic is so that we can meet up with our clients as much as meet new people. So we invest ourselves into the evolution, if you will, of the conversation of one-on-one and otherwise. So thank you for bringing that up.
Yes. Thank you so much for everything you do. Thank you for everything, CLA, and keep changing spines, lives, and minds with chiropractic. And look forward to seeing everybody who's here, who's listening on Higher Ground in September. RiseUpToMileHigh.com.
Yes. Well, we'll be there.